He had vaults full of gold and everything money could buy. But it took one small act of kindness from a child with nothing to change his life forever. Alexander Grant was a man the world envied. At 45 years old, he had built an empire that stretched across real estate, technology, and luxury goods. His face appeared in magazines, his name in headlines, and his fortune in numbers so high most people couldn't even imagine them. Every morning, his driver rolled up a long cobblestone driveway that led to a mansion the size of a hotel. The house had 10 bedrooms, each decorated with imported Italian marble, hand-woven rugs, and chandeliers worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. His garage looked like a showroom, sleek sports cars polished to a shine, an antique Rolls-Royce, and even a rare custom-built motorcycle he had never ridden. And yet, the strangest thing about Alexander's life was the silence. He would walk through his mansion, and the only sound he heard was the echo of his own footsteps bouncing off the high ceilings. The rooms, though beautiful, were empty. The laughter of friends, the warmth of family dinners, the simple joy of sharing a couch with someone you loved, those things didn't exist here. Most nights, Alexander sat at a long mahogany dining table that stretched almost 20 feet. The table could seat 20 people, but there he was, one man at the head of it, eating alone. The chefs served him gourmet meals plated like artwork, but he barely tasted them. He pushed the food around his plate, more interested in scrolling through his phone than savoring the flavors. His phone only ever lit up for business. Investors asking for updates, board members demanding bigger profits, old acquaintances suddenly remembering his number whenever they wanted money. Never once did his phone ring with a simple, "Hey Alex, how are you doing?" He had dated before, but those relationships always felt shallow. People saw the billionaire, not the man. And eventually, Alexander grew tired of trying. So he convinced himself that this was what success looked like, that the weight of gold in his private vaults mattered more than the weight of another human hand in his. He even told himself, money is the ultimate measure of success. People will leave, but wealth stays. But late at night, as he lay awake in his king-sized bed, in a room far too big for one person, a quiet question always haunted him. If I really am so successful, why do I feel so empty? What Alexander didn't know was that his answer was waiting for him just outside his world of luxury. And on one rainy night, a chance encounter in the most ordinary of places would set into motion a lesson he never saw coming. Because sometimes it takes losing yourself in riches to finally see the true value of kindness. It was a late evening in the city. The rain fell in heavy sheets, blurring the glow of streetlights and tapping against the windshield of Alexander's sleek black sedan. The driver asked, "Sir, would you like to head straight home?" But Alexander, staring out the window at the blurred city lights, shook his head. "No, just pull over somewhere, anywhere." Moments later, the car rolled into the parking lot of a small roadside diner. The neon sign above the door buzzed faintly, half of the letters burned out. The place looked tired, like it had seen better days, but inside, it radiated a quiet kind of warmth. When Alexander stepped in, the bell above the door jingled, and the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filled the air. A waitress in a faded uniform offered him a polite smile and pointed him toward an empty booth by the window. He slid into the booth, loosening his tie, and for the first time all day, no one recognized him. No flashing cameras, no investors demanding his attention. Just a man in a booth, alone. But as he sat there, something caught his eye. Across the diner, in a corner booth, sat a young mother and her little boy. Their clothes weren't fancy. Her jacket had a missing button, his sneakers were worn and scuffed, but they didn't seem to care. In front of them sat a single plate of food, a grilled cheese sandwich and a small basket of fries. She gently pushed half of the sandwich toward him, and he grinned, taking a big bite like it was a feast. What struck Alexander wasn't the meal. It was the way they looked at each other. The mother laughed at his silly jokes. The boy leaned against her shoulder, whispering secrets that made her smile. They didn't have much, yet the love between them filled the room more than any luxury ever could. The boy, 7 years old, maybe 8, noticed Alexander sitting alone at his table. His eyes lingered for a moment. Something about the man's expression, the way he stared at his untouched cup of coffee, made the boy tilt his head curiously. Then, without saying a word, the child reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crumpled napkin, unwrapped it carefully, and revealed a single cookie. It wasn't much, slightly broken, maybe saved from school lunch, but it was all he had. The boy hopped off his seat and walked across the diner. He stopped in front of Alexander's booth, looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, and said softly, "You look like you need this more than me." He placed the cookie on the table. Alexander froze, his throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Here he was, a man with vaults full of gold, cars worth millions, and a home filled with treasures. And yet, this little boy, who clearly had almost nothing, was offering him his only cookie. The mother rushed over, embarrassed. "Ethan," she whispered, "you can't just bother people like that." She smiled awkwardly at Alexander. "I'm so sorry, sir." But Alexander shook his head. His voice cracked slightly as he replied, "No, thank you. This means more than you know." He picked up the cookie, staring at it as if it weighed more than all the gold in his vaults. For the first time in years, Alexander felt humbled. He felt seen. He felt cared for. That night, he left the diner without finishing his food, but with something far more valuable, a question echoing in his mind. How could a child with nothing give so freely, while I, with everything, never knew how to give at all? Alexander didn't know it yet, but his curiosity about this small family, this mother and her son, was about to pull him into a world he had never known, and what he discovered about their lives would change him forever. But who were they really, though? And when Alexander decided to follow that curiosity, what shocking truth about their struggles would he uncover? The next morning, Alexander woke up with a restless mind. He had spent the night turning over one simple moment in his head, the boy's tiny hand placing a broken cookie on his table, and those innocent words, "You look like you need this more than me." He couldn't shake it. It gnawed at him more than any business deal, more than any loss or gain in the stock market ever had. So, instead of heading to his office like he usually did, Alexander told his driver, "Take me back to that diner." When he walked inside, the bell above the door jingled again, and there they were, the mother and her son, sitting at the same corner booth. They were sharing pancakes this time, splitting them carefully so the boy got a little more than his mother. Alexander paid for their meal quietly at the counter before approaching their table. "Hi," he said gently, his voice less commanding than usual. "We met last night. I never got to thank you properly." The little boy lit up. "You ate my cookie," he said proudly. The mother smiled politely, though her eyes carried caution. "That was very kind of you, Ethan. Why don't you finish your breakfast?" Then to Alexander, she added softly, "You didn't have to do that." Alexander slid into the booth across from them. "I wanted to. My name's Alex," he said, "not Alexander Grant, billionaire, just Alex." "What's yours?" The mother hesitated before replying. "Maria, and this is Ethan." They spoke for a while, Alexander asking simple questions. Where Ethan went to school, what games he liked to play. Slowly, Maria opened up. She told him about working 2 jobs, waiting tables at one restaurant during the day, then cleaning offices late into the night. Even with both, it barely covered the basics. Rent was too high, groceries too expensive. Alexander frowned. "So where do you live?" Maria hesitated, glancing at her son before finally admitting, "We're staying at a shelter downtown. It's temporary, at least that's what I keep telling him." Those words hit Alexander harder than any business failure ever had. He looked at Ethan, who was now coloring on a napkin with a stubby crayon. The boy had no idea how much his mother was carrying, and yet he was smiling, laughing, just being a kid. Something inside Alexander shifted that moment. For years, he had equated generosity with writing a check, throwing money at problems, then walking away, never to think about them again. But with Maria and Ethan, it felt different. He didn't want to walk away. He didn't want this to be just another act of charity. So he stayed. He started joining them for their small dinners, sometimes in that same diner, sometimes in the shelter's cafeteria. He helped Ethan with his homework, sitting beside him as the boy sounded out words or struggled through math problems. One evening, Ethan giggled while teaching Alexander how to fold a paper airplane. "You don't know how to do this," the boy teased. Alexander laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. "I guess not. You'll have to be my teacher." and Maria, watching them from across the table, smiled softly. She hadn't seen a man invest in her son's joy like this in a very long time. Night after night, Alexander found himself returning, not because he felt sorry for them, but because he felt alive with them. Their world was small, but it was full of something his mansion had never known: love, compassion, and joy in the little things. For the first time in his life, Alexander began to understand wealth wasn't measured by what you owned. It was measured by what you gave and how you loved. But his journey was only just beginning, because soon, the people in Alexander's business empire, the very ones who measured him only by profit and gold, were about to discover what he was doing. And when they did, they weren't going to be happy. So how would they react when they learned their billionaire boss was trading gold for kindness? And would Alexander have the courage to stand by this new path he was walking? Back at the towering headquarters of Grant Enterprises, the mood was very different from the warmth of the diner. The boardroom was lined with polished oak tables, leather chairs, and men and women in sharp suits flipping through financial reports. They measured Alexander's success not in smiles or hope, but in numbers, profits, market shares, investments. When Alexander walked in that morning, his mind wasn't on profits. It was still on Ethan's laugh, Maria's tired but grateful smile, and the simple joy of paper airplanes scattered across a table. He cleared his throat. "I want to make some changes." The directors glanced up. One of them, a stern man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses. "Changes? What kind of changes?" Alexander spoke calmly but firmly. "I want to start using our resources to help families in need. Housing, education, healthcare, programs that actually change lives." The room fell silent for a moment, before erupting in disbelief. "You can't be serious. This isn't philanthropy. It's business. We're here to maximize wealth, not waste it on strangers." Alexander stood tall. For most of his life, he might have agreed with them, but not anymore. He looked each of them in the eyes and said, "Gold can't feed a lonely soul. Kindness can. If our wealth doesn't serve people, then what's the point of having it?" The board was furious. Some even threatened to resign. But Alexander didn't back down. He had seen something they hadn't, what true wealth looked like, and he refused to ignore it. In the weeks that followed, Alexander redirected funds into projects that lifted people up. He visited struggling families' personally, delivering groceries, helping kids with school supplies, paying medical bills. He didn't just throw money at problems. He showed up. He listened. He cared. In one neighborhood, he helped renovate a rundown apartment building so dozens of families could finally have safe, affordable homes. In another, he funded scholarships for kids who never dreamed college was possible. But what shocked people most wasn't his money, it was his presence. Alexander didn't send assistants or representatives. He sat in living rooms, ate at kitchen tables, and shook hands with people who had once felt invisible. Word began to spread, not about Alexander Grant, the billionaire, but about Alex, the man who cared. Communities started whispering about the billionaire who actually showed up. But Alexander's journey was still incomplete. Because one night, after helping Maria and Ethan move into a small but cozy apartment of their own, something happened that would touch him deeper than anything yet. Ethan, the boy who once shared his only cookie, looked up at Alexander with eyes full of tears and spoke words that pierced his heart forever. What did Ethan say to Alexander that night, and how could one small child finally reveal to him the true meaning of being rich? The new apartment wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room that smelled faintly of fresh paint. But to Maria and Ethan, it felt like a palace. That evening, the 3 of them sat on the floor among unpacked boxes, eating pizza straight from the box, laughing about how they had nothing but paper cups for soda. Ethan, full of energy, ran around the room, exploring every corner. "Mom, I have my own room," he shouted, his voice echoing with joy. Maria sat back, her eyes glassy. She whispered to Alexander, "You don't know what this means to us. For the first time in years, I feel like we can breathe again." Alexander nodded, humbled. "You deserve this. You both do." A few minutes later, Ethan crawled onto Alexander's lap, wrapped his small arms around him, and whispered words that froze Alexander in place. "You gave us a home, but more than that, you gave us hope." Alexander's eyes welled up, his throat tightened. All his life, he had chased after more. more houses, more cars, more gold. But in that moment, with a child's arms wrapped around him and those simple words echoing in his ears, he realized this was the wealth he had been searching for all along. Not the vaults of gold locked behind steel doors, not the mansions filled with silence, not the bank accounts that never stopped growing. Real wealth was here, in the warmth of gratitude, the power of kindness, and the joy of knowing you made someone's life better. For the first time in his life, Alexander Grant felt truly rich. News of his transformation spread, not through business magazines or Forbes lists, but through neighborhoods, schools, and communities. People didn't talk about his billions anymore. They talked about his kindness, about the way he sat with the poor, laughed with children, and stood up for people who felt forgotten. And slowly, others began to follow his example. Because Alexander had proven something the world often forgets: gold will always lose its shine. But kindness leaves a light that never fades. Moral of this story: true wealth isn't measured by the gold you collect or the fortune you build. It's measured by the lives you touch, the kindness you share, and the hope you give to others. Money can buy comfort, but it can never fill an empty heart. Kindness, however, has the power to heal, to connect, and to make us truly rich in ways no bank account ever could. If this touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story that could change the way you see the world. And remember, we're not just telling stories, we're changing lives.